Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to our 200th episode of the Natural Super Kids podcast. We are so excited and proud of ourselves here at Natural Super Kids. And I just want to acknowledge that this is a team effort. To get a podcast episode out every single week takes a lot of organisation, a lot of planning, a lot of work. And, we don't often talk about the background, the background work that goes into our podcast. And of course, you hear me sharing information, but we have an amazing podcast editor. Shout out to Kaz, who has been editing our podcast and producing our podcast since we started. And we just love working with her. And then we have people internally on the team here at Natural Super Kids doing the marketing to get the podcast out there, writing the podcast show notes, coming up with different ideas, reaching out to guests to have on. And so I just want to acknowledge everyone on the team here at Natural Super Kids who has had a part to play in us reaching this incredible milestone of 200 episodes. And also, this would not be possible without you, our listeners. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sending through feedback. We love hearing from you. And on that, the best way to reach out to us about the podcast, if you've got a suggestion for a podcast topic or a suggestion for a guest you'd love to hear on the podcast, or even just some feedback on a podcast episode that you either loved or didn't like, we like hearing all of the feedback. And you can get in touch with us by sending us a message on Instagram or by emailing us, jessica@naturalsuperkids.com. So for this 200th episode, we thought we'd do something different and do a bit of an Ask the Naturopath session. So our team has put together some questions for me to answer. Now, these are questions that commonly come in to us at Natural Super Kids, and I'm excited to talk through them and share my suggestions and answers to these questions. We're going to be talking about food intolerances. We're going to be talking about nutrients, fussy eating, gut health. We're talking about, diet and lifestyle when it comes to healthy kids, sugar in kids' diets, and some, ideas for moving away from so much sugar, and so much more. So let's get stuck into it. Our first question is, how can I tell if my child's tummy troubles are from food intolerances or something else? Great question. Now, this is tricky, and we get a lot of questions about food intolerances here at Natural Super Kids because they are so common and they are so tricky to figure out. And what makes them tricky is that food intolerance symptoms can take up to 72 hours or 3 days to appear. So when your child shows a symptom, say they get a tummy ache, it might not be from the food they've just eaten. It could be from food they ate yesterday. And also what makes this tricky as well is that the symptoms are so varied and they're not just limited to digestive symptoms. So when we're talking about food intolerances, of course, there can be digestive symptoms, sore tummies, constipation, loose bowels, reflux. Any sort of discomfort in the digestive system is common with food intolerances. But food intolerances can also present as skin symptoms, eczema, hives, itchy skin, red skin, respiratory symptoms, congestion, sinus issues, things like headaches, mood, behavior. So it can be really tricky to figure out, one, is this a food intolerance? And two, what is my child reacting to? So one of the first steps that I recommend if you're wondering whether your child's tummy troubles are from food intolerances is to start a simple food diary. Just write down briefly what they're eating and keep a track of any symptoms that come up. This can be helpful for you, but even more helpful if you seek help from a practitioner. And so you might not be able to see any patterns, but taking a food diary and symptom diary like this to a practitioner can be super helpful for them to figure out exactly what is going on, because food intolerances aren't always just individual. Yes, you can have an intolerance to dairy, for example, but you can also have an intolerance to food, like naturally occurring food chemicals such as salicylates, which are found in a variety of different vegetables and fruits, for example. And so this is where knowledge from a practitioner can come in really handy, because they can see patterns that you might not be able to when you are tracking things in a food and symptom diary. So food diary and working with a practitioner is really important here. It's going to be almost impossible for you to figure this out for yourself. The other thing I want to mention with food intolerances is that generally, food intolerances are coming from a less than healthy, a low functioning digestive system. And that could be that enzymes aren't being produced properly, or there's an issue with the health of the microbiome, or there is some issues with leaky gut. And we're going to be talking more about leaky gut in another question later on. But the integrity of that gut lining can be compromised and be leading to food intolerances. So anytime where we are suspecting food intolerances, we want to be working on improving gut health generally. And so we want to be making sure that the foods that our kids are eating are gut health friendly. And, we're really boosting gut health with things like bone broth, fermented foods, good fiber rich foods, and, on the whole, more whole foods as opposed to processed foods. And we're going to be talking about that as a bit of a theme through the conversation today. So they are my thoughts on food intolerances. It can be really tricky to figure out whether your child's tummy troubles are food intolerances or something else, but food diary, working with a practitioner, and working on boosting gut health in general can really help. And I'll make sure there's a link to our free gut health ebook in the show notes so that you can have access to how to get started to start to improve your child's gut health. So check the link in the show notes for that free resource. Okay, moving on to our second question. What is the difference between cod liver oil and fish oil, and which one is best for my child? Okay, so both cod liver oil and fish oil are great sources of omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. And these omega-3 fatty acids are really important for our children's brain health and development, their eye health. They act as natural anti-inflammatories in the body. They're important for mood, for learning, for concentration. So both cod liver oil and fish oil are good sources of omega-3. Fish oil has generally much higher levels of omega-3s, but that's all it contains, whereas cod liver oil also contains naturally occurring vitamin A and vitamin D, as well as the omega-3s. But compared to fish oil, the omega-3s are generally lower than you'd get in a fish oil. So in terms of which one is going to be best for your child, cod liver oil is one that I choose when I'm specifically looking for immune health benefits, because that naturally occurring vitamin A and vitamin D are great for immune health. Vitamin A and vitamin D are also really important when it comes to skin health and skin integrity. So I would generally choose a cod liver oil over a fish oil for immune health and most of the time for skin issues. I say most of the time because fish oil is higher in omega-3, and sometimes we really want that more concentrated, if you like, action on reducing inflammation. then fish oil is going to be better for that. So it's a bit of a tricky one depending on how inflamed the skin is. Fish oil I would choose for brain health, for mood, for learning, for concentration, and for that stronger anti-inflammatory action due to those higher omega-3s. Now, to get even further into this, you can find fish oils that are higher in EPA, one of those essential fatty acids, and others that might be higher in DHA, which is another one of those essential fatty acids. EPA is the one with the more anti-inflammatory actions. DHA has more of an impact on brain health, mood, concentration, and learning. So if you are in doubt, you can seek help from a practitioner, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the difference. They're both great supplements, and supplements we regularly prescribe to kids here at Natural Super Kids because a lot of kids are lacking those essential fats in their diets. That brings us to the next question really nicely. Are supplements really necessary for my kids' health? The cost of living is so high and they can be so expensive. That is such a valid point. We want to make sure that if we are giving our kids supplements, they're needed and they are doing what we want them to do. So I get it. Families at the moment are, some families are struggling to put enough food on the table, let alone supplements, and good quality supplements can be expensive. But to reframe that, it's much better to invest in a good quality supplement that's actually going to have the desired effect than to reach for the cheap stuff that you might find on the supermarket shelves that you could probably get the same benefits from food in because or even more benefits from food because the amount of nutrients in those cheaper supplements can be quite low. And also, the form of nutrients that they contain are often not very well absorbed or metabolized or used within the body. So if you are looking at supplements for kids, it's worth investing in the better quality brands. I will say that. In an ideal world, supplements would not be necessary. We would be able to get everything we need from food. But unfortunately, it is difficult to get everything, especially that our kids' growing bodies need, from food alone. And that is due to things like farming practices, depleted soils. So if food is grown in soil that doesn't have the nutrients in it that it should, then the food that's grown in that soil is going to be lacking nutrients. And then we've obviously got processing of food that depletes nutrients even further. Now, many kids are lacking nutrition in their diets on top of that due to fussy eating, dietary restrictions, allergies, intolerances, and those sorts of things. So, for example, a child might be dairy-free because of a cow's milk protein allergy or intolerance, and so you might question whether they're getting enough calcium, whether they're getting enough vitamin D, which, dairy can be a good source of. So again, I keep coming back to this. It is important to get professional advice when it comes to supplements so that you can really explore, one, does my child need a supplement? What exactly do they need? And what is going to be the most effective supplement? How am I going to get the most bang for my buck when choosing a supplement? And these are the things that practitioners can help you with. And so I would say, not all kids need lots of supplements. We certainly do prescribe supplements for kids here at Natural Super Kids. A lot of the kids we're seeing have got health issues, whether that's physical health, mental health, mood, behavior, sleep, and can really benefit from supplements. But we are also very conscious of making sure we're only prescribing supplements that a child needs and making sure that, we're revisiting, and this is important for parents to revisit, does my child still need this supplement? Just because they needed it 3 months ago doesn't mean they need it now. And maybe the dose can be reduced Maybe you can go to every second day dosing rather than everyday dosing, or even a couple of times a week dosing. And that can really save you money over time as well. And that's where support from a practitioner that is knowledgeable is important. So yeah, really important not to give particularly certain supplements, certain nutrients to kids who might not need them. For example, iron. Iron's a very widely prescribed supplement for kids. A lot of the more mainstream iron supplements that doctors will prescribe are not very well absorbed, as an example. So you might be not just paying for the doctor's appointment and the blood test and then a revisit to the doctor and then the supplement itself, but you're getting a supplement that isn't very well absorbed. So you're wasting a lot of your money. And so that's where, naturopaths and nutritionists can come in, can be really helpful because we know nutrition a lot more than the average GP does as well. So be careful of where you're getting your advice, where you're getting your prescription for supplements. We see lots of unnecessary supplements being prescribed to kids, but we also see the wrong types of supplements being prescribed to kids as well. So that's a big topic. Hopefully that helps. Next question, how much sugar is too much for kids and what are some realistic swaps? I love this question because one of the best things we can do when it comes to our children's health and nutrition is be mindful of their sugar intake. So many kids are eating too much sugar, and I'm going to admit that my kids' sugar intake has been high over the summer holidays. One, because they're teenagers and out doing their own thing, which we've got another question coming up about that. And two, just because we're in holiday mode, and there's been ice creams and, sugary snacks more than there normally would be. So it's easy to get off track when it comes to sugar. And I'll come back to like the World Health Organization recommendation. So the World Health Organization recommends an upper limit of somewhere between 6 and 12 teaspoons of added sugar per day, depending on the child's age, or 5 to 10% of their total daily energy intake. That's important because kids who are picky eaters, they might not have much of an appetite, might be consuming less calories in a day. So that 5 to 10% of their total energy intake could be a lot less sugar than 6 teaspoons. So it can be tricky to work out for your own child. But I also want to say that the recommendation for children under 2 is no added sugar at all. And this is really important because this is when the age, 0 to 2 years, is when taste preferences are established. So adding sugar unnecessarily before kids are 2 or giving them foods that have added sugar in it before they're 2 can really set them up for lots of fussy and picky eating and that taste preference towards those sugary, sweeter, processed foods. So the less sugar, the better. We need to understand that sugar is not essential. We can live without added sugar. We can get plenty of the carbohydrates we need from natural foods, fruits and vegetables and grains and legumes. So we don't actually need any added sugar in our diet. So although the World Health Organization recommends, up to 12 teaspoons, which I think is actually quite high for older kids, we need to be aware that less is better. Sugar, and I'm going to be doing a podcast in the next couple of weeks on sugar. So look out for that. So we'll go into this a bit deeper, but sugar depletes microbiome health, so gut health, and also immune health. And so the less sugar we can give our kids, the better. And what I recommend you do focus on when trying to limit your kids' sugar is thinking about breakfast, because unfortunately a lot of kids' sugar intake comes in at breakfast time through cereals and other processed breakfast foods, and also snacks. So if we can focus on those two elements of our child's diet, we can really start to reduce how much added sugar is going in. So rather than cereal for breakfast, let's swap to a homemade granola, a homemade muesli, a smoothie, or an egg-based breakfast. Like a simple switch from cereal to smoothie, with making sure that that smoothie's got some good, nutritious ingredients in it. So yes, we can put some fruit in there, but we want to be adding protein. We want to be adding some yogurt and our favorite milk, for example, even a bit of protein powder, some nuts and seeds, some chia, some flaxseed, those sorts of things. So we don't want a overly sweet, sugary smoothie. So that's something to be mindful of. Some veggies in there can be good. A handful of spinach in a chocolate smoothie is a really good way to go for kids that, might not like that real green sort of smoothie. So switching over to a more whole food breakfast or a more savory breakfast, even if it's just some scrambled eggs and a piece of good quality bread, is going to be way better than a cereal or other sugar-laden breakfast. And then when it comes to snacks, so snack time is another time where lots of sugar can be, included in a child's diet. A great thing to do is to try and build in more savory snacks rather than sweet snacks, and thinking about fresh fruits and vegetables and crackers and dip, and smoothies again can be good for snacks, home-baked treats. So rather than buying muffins and cakes and biscuits from the shop, when we make our own, yes, we're going to add some sugar, but we can add a healthier sugar, such as a coconut sugar or a rapadura sugar. Yes, it's still sugar, but it's got some nutritional quality in it, as opposed to like a white sugar that's going to be added in the biscuits that we're going to buy from the supermarket. But we can also control how much sugar goes in, and we can add other nutritional ingredients in there as well. We can change the type of flour we use, for example, from a white flour to a spelt flour or, a coconut flour. So we can mix it up a lot more if we're focusing on those home-baked snacks. Snack plates are great. My kids love snack plates still. My kids are almost 15 and 17. And if I put the effort to create them a snack plate, they will always eat it, as opposed to if they're left to their own devices, grabbing, whatever they want, it'll definitely be less nutritious. So on a snack plate, I'm always mindful to add something with protein in it. So it might be a boiled egg or some sliced cheese or some leftover chicken from the night before, or a bliss ball with lots of nuts and seeds in it. I'll put some fresh fruit and veg on there, maybe some whole grain crackers or like a piece of sourdough bread that I've baked. So a real good mix of different foods. And I try and lean towards more savory foods as opposed to sweet foods, which are the ones that my kids would reach for if given the option. So there's some tips for reducing sugar. As I said, listen out for a upcoming podcast episode where I'm going to go into sugar in a bit more detail. Okay, next question is, my kids are in their teens and it's getting harder to have a say in the foods they eat. How do I still encourage them to eat healthy while letting them take the reins? So this was a question that came in. Look, I get it. I'm right here with you in the teen years. And there's a couple of things I want to say about this. One, we've got to trust that we've given them a good foundation and that they're probably not going to make healthy choices every time, but they will, come back to those foundations. I like to talk to them about the effects, especially if they're experiencing them. So if my kids are really tired or their mood's a bit off, they're grumpy, they're irritable, they're not able to get to sleep, they've got tummy issues, for example. I mean, these things aren't really common in my kids, but, if they have a tummy ache or, they're irritable, they're common sort of like things that I would bring this up in, or their skin, if their skin's breaking out, common for teens. I will talk to them about, hang on a minute, you've been you've been out with your friends a lot, like, you've been having ice creams every day, or you've had fast food a couple of times this week when you've been out with your friends. That probably isn't helping the way that you're feeling and the way that your skin is looking. So give them those things that are going to motivate them to make healthier changes next time. I also like to suggest healthy options when they're out with their friends, and especially if they're forking out their own money to buy things. Like one thing that we've talked about to our kids about is going into the supermarket when they're out with friends rather than going to the fast food place. Go to the supermarket, get yourself, a roll and something to put on your roll, or, some healthy options, a piece of fruit, maybe a cucumber. And one, you're going to save a lot of money, and two, you're going to feel much better about it. So, or you might suggest, cold rolls or sushi or something that they like that would be a better option than fast food, for example. And the big thing here is to focus on what you have control over. I think it's inevitable that most kids are going to get fast food when they're out with their friends. It's what teenagers often do. And so, yes, it can be frustrating when you've got a lot of knowledge about nutrition. I've learned over the years to let it go and to focus on what I do have control over. So making sure they're leaving the house with a good breakfast in them. When they're coming home, having one of those healthy snack plates ready for them, making sure they're having a nourishing dinner that night. So balancing out any unhealthy choices that they might make with some healthy, nourishing foods is something that the big thing that I like to focus on. Okay, next question is, how do I encourage my picky eater to try more gut-friendly foods? This is such a great question because if you're not aware, gut imbalances can lead to picky eating. So kids that are picky, fussy eaters, we need to improve their gut health. So when there is an imbalance in the good and bad bacteria in the gut, or when there's the microbiome isn't as healthy as it could be, there's often a preference. This will lead to a preference for those processed foods, those beige, starchy, sugary foods that fussy eaters generally prefer. And so addressing that gut imbalance can really help a picky eater start to eat and accept a wider variety of foods. So I love that this question is focused on how do I get more gut-friendly foods into my child. So we want to be working on that gut imbalance. And it can be hard because while they've got that gut imbalance, they may be unlikely to accept and eat gut-friendly foods. So you could look at a good quality probiotic supplement that is easy for kids to take, that you can get in to start to address that gut imbalance. The other thing I would say is think about the tastes and the textures and the foods that your picky eater already likes and go from there. And think about how to increase or include gut-friendly foods within those meals or textures or tastes. So, for example, if your picky eater loves spaghetti bolognese, you could add some bone broth into the bolognese, and that's a gut-friendly food. You could switch from low-fiber processed foods slowly to more high-fiber foods. So, rye is a great prebiotic fiber. It feeds the gut microbiome. So it's a gut-friendly food. So switching from like a white bread to some rye in the bread can be a good option, or from a white cracker to a rye cracker, or a white wrap to a rye wrap. So like thinking about some switches that you can make that are higher in fiber. If your kids like jelly textures, gelatin gummies can go down really well. I would encourage you to experiment with different gelatin gummy recipes, because that can go down really well and is really lovely and nourishing for the gut. And another thing for picky eaters to keep in mind is that when we cook and then cool potatoes, rice, and pasta, it increases the resistant starch in those foods, and resistant starch is a really good fuel for the microbiome. So it's a gut-friendly food. So cooked and cooled potatoes, rice, and pasta in something like a potato salad, or a frittata, or a rice salad, or a pasta salad, can work really well for starting to nourish that gut. I think when kids are picky, we need to make slow changes and thinking about what they already like and slowly adding some gut-friendly ingredients and gut-friendly foods to those foods can be a really good way to start. And our last question for today is, I'm worried my child has leaky gut. Where do I even start? Now, good news, I'm going to do a podcast episode coming up on leaky gut. So listen out for that one as well. As you can hear, I've gotten lots of ideas for dedicated podcast episodes to some of these topics as we've gone through that I want to sort of elaborate more on. So leaky gut, or otherwise known as intestinal permeability, really common in kids. And it's where the gut lining, which is only about as thick as our eyelid, starts to break down and the cells get sort of gaps between them. And so food that should be contained within the gut starts to leak out into the bloodstream before it's been fully digested. Sounds pretty gross, but it is really common. And the thing that drives leaky gut is poor microbiome health, dysbiosis, so that imbalance of good and bad bacteria, lack of fiber in the diet, even overuse of antibiotics can lead to leaky gut as well. So these are all the things that drive leaky gut. And again, another bit of a gross little tidbit is that when the bacteria within the gut don't have any fiber to feed on, so fiber fuels and feeds the good bacteria within the gut. When the gut microbes don't have any fiber coming in because a child isn't eating enough or isn't eating any, they start to feed or consume the mucus in the gut. Now, this mucus is protective mucus. It's healthy mucus that protects the gut lining. And so that's just a bit of background information as to why leaky gut sort of comes about in the first place. So the little gut microbes are gobbling up all that mucus that our gut relies on to stay healthy. And then the gut lining is left very vulnerable to leaky gut. And so there's a couple of things that we really want to focus on if we are worried about leaky gut. First of all, we can get some testing done to establish what exactly is going on in the gut. We really love microbiome testing for this, and so we can help with that via one-on-one consultations. So that is an option, but also, you just want to make sure that the gut has everything that it needs to be healthy and to start to repair. And where to start with that is making sure that the gut microbiome is healthy through either probiotics or fermented foods, so including those in the diet where you can. And then we want to be making sure we're feeding those microbes with gut-friendly fiber. And so increasing fiber-rich foods in the diet through fruits and vegetables and legumes and whole grains can make a really big difference to starting to heal the gut. Of course, your child might need extra support. They might need supplements. There's certain nutrients and amino acids that can really speed up that gut healing process, but that is where I would start, making sure that your child's gut is getting the ingredients it needs to be healthy. Like I said, I will be doing a dedicated episode to leaky gut and how we can avoid it and heal from it for our kids in the coming weeks. Okay, they were really great questions. That was obviously a very varied conversation, something in there for everyone. I hope that has been helpful. And if you have any suggestions on topics you would like us to cover on the podcast, please let us know. This 200th episode is also a good opportunity for me to ask you for a review. I don't do this very often, reminding people to review the podcast. If you love the podcast, or maybe this is your first episode and you've really enjoyed this conversation, depending on what app you use, you can follow or subscribe to the podcast, and you can also leave a review. And we would so appreciate any reviews you leave. It really helps the podcast be found by more people. And like I said, I'd love to hear from you. Send us a message on Instagram at Natural Super Kids or an email to jessica@naturalsuperkids.com with any suggestions that you have that we can do to make this podcast better as we go into our next 200 episodes. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you guys more than you know. You make this it possible for us to keep producing this podcast. So just wanted to say thank you. See you next week. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.